Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries, and in this video I'm going to be looking at the Perilous Wilds, a wilderness exploration supplement for Dungeon World by Lampblack Brimstone. Now, Dungeon World is one of my favourite games. It gives you that good D&D flavour with a rule system that is streamlined to the max and places a heavy emphasis on collaborative campaign building with your players. I reviewed it some time ago. If you want to see that review, you can click on the link there to go and see that. Now, I believe this is only the second Dungeon World add-on or supplement that I've actually reviewed, and that's not a comment on Dungeon World supplements in general. I'm sure they're excellent. It's just that Dungeon World is such a complete game. I've not really felt the need to go out and obtain a number of additional supplements. Now, I originally picked up a PDF copy of this after I watched Questing Beast's review of the book. So shout out to Questing Beast, and you can see his review by clicking on the link there. The author of The Perilous Wilds is Jason Lutz, with assistance from Jeremy Strandberg. It's a fantasy supplement, and I'm reviewing the black and white PDF copy, which is about 72 pages long. So let's crack straight on with the contents, and we begin with an introduction where you are launched straight into what you can expect from this book. It builds on the idea of collaborative world building, which is one of the major themes of Dungeon World, and is something that personally I absolutely love. In my opinion, if you want your players to get invested in your campaign world and take ownership of it, then one of the best ways to do that is to give them a stake in creating it. And Perilous Wilds breaks this down into an easy to follow 3-step process. Step 1 is ask. Ask your players questions about the world they are exploring and use those answers to fill in some of the details of your campaign world. It saves you work and, more importantly, rewards your players for their creativity. Step 2 is say. When there is no need for a question but the game fiction needs advancing, the GM should use their knowledge of the game up until this point and their own GM flair to flesh the world out or move the narrative along. And 3, roll. If asking doesn't work and the GM is at a loss for ideas, or maybe you just want to add a bit of a random element to spice things up, that's when you should break out the dice and roll using the move mechanics from Dungeon World. Perilous Wilds also gives you a big bucket of extra options in that regard. The next chapter is learning the language, and Perilous Wilds includes a glossary of the new terms used within the book and how they relate to your gaming experience. I'm a massive fan of books doing this. I hate coming across a term in a book before it's been defined, since then I have to break up my reading by flicking through the book to find that definition. But with a distinct glossary, you can just bookmark that one page, and if you need a quick reminder, boom, there it is. Perilous Wilds introduces the following terms. Map, a drawing or diagram showing the spatial relations of various features in your world. Regions, discrete areas which divide a map. And areas, steadings and sites, which are referred to collectively as places. These are adventure ideas or areas of interest in your regions. Anyone who's played Dungeon World should be familiar with steadings, which are your towns, cities, etc. There's also the term almanac, which is a written record of what exists within a region, effectively the GM notes for that region. And Perilous Wilds splits encounters into 2 types. Discoveries and dangers. These are pretty self-explanatory, being anything you find that isn't immediately threatening or something that, if left unchecked, may prove harmful. We're also provided with some additional tags, and tags are simple descriptive terms used in Dungeon World to define something about an area, a monster or other item of interest. Perilous Wilds adds tags for climates, terrain types, danger levels and alignments of regions, along with some other general tags. These are all useful when describing a region because they give you an idea of what is going on there at a glance when you're just flicking through your notes. For example, if a region has the blighted tag, you know straight away as soon as you see that some curse, poison or disease has afflicted that area. I was a big fan of these in Dungeon World as a convenient GM shorthand, and I remain a fan of them in this book. A couple of example almanacs are then offered. One is an abbreviated short version detailing a human kingdom called Othun, and the other is a more detailed almanac covering a wooded highland area known as the Chalkwood Downs. Both these show a GM how you can use the systems in this book to create areas for your own campaign, whether you want something short and punchy or something more intricate and detailed. We then move on to a section called Draw the Map. And now, whether you love or hate them, maps have been a part of RPGs, and in particular that D&D experience, forever. Whether you're talking about hex maps of campaign worlds, tactical maps for miniatures, play, or more loosely defined zone maps. The benefit of maps is that they not only let us know where we are physically in a place, and they allow us to plan the movement of our characters, NPCs, etc., but they also tell us where places are in relation to one another, providing us with more knowledge and a more detailed picture of the world. Since the GM typically serves as the player's window into the campaign world, describing everything that they sense, a map can be a useful shortcut, providing at-a-glance information without a GM having to continually describe the distance between towns and villages or remind people what's just over the next rise. Perilous Wilds takes a loose approach to creating a map, eschewing accurate measurements of distances to focus on creating a map populated with interesting and compelling regions. This chapter gives some advice on how to divide up a pre-existing map into regions, but it mostly focuses on creating a new campaign map, suggesting that the GM define a centre point, a place where the PCs begin, whether that be a town, a village or whatever, and that the players take it in turns to add regions to the map, defining them loosely as they go along. Some useful advice is given on naming places as well, which is something I often struggle with personally. If names in a setting don't sound consistent or like they come from the same language, then a campaign world can just seem like a scattering of random places. Names can really tie parts of your world together, and the book offers some good advice on this, including running your names through a translation tool to change them all into the same language, which is an approach I've often found useful myself in games. The chapter wraps up by suggesting that players and the GM add legends and rumours to the map. These serve as handy adventure hooks for your campaign. There's a nice little example at the end of the chapter, along with some handy random tables to serve as inspiration should you be stuck with ideas. Then we move on to the next chapter called Lead the Way, which deals with the creation of followers or hirelings, entirely replacing the rules from the Dungeon World core book. I have to admit, I've not really used these rules much in any Dungeon World game that I've ran. My players have just never really expressed a desire to recruit or hire followers, but I do appreciate that that's part of the sort of older D&D experience and may be important for some people in their games. Reading these rules, it seems that once recruited, followers effectively allow their masters access to additional moves or actions covering their speciality. How well they do it is based on the player rolling either using the loyalty or quality characteristic of the follower. Followers can also be used to give the PC a bonus to their rolls, although doing so exposes the follower to any consequences. And if a follower's loyalty ever reaches -3, then they desert the PC. A series of tables follow that allow you to roll to determine the characteristics of available followers. The book also suggests that the GM write 1 to 3 moves for the followers representing their area of expertise, and some vague suggestions are made as to what these might be. Now, initially, this might seem like a bit of a cop-out, expecting the GM to write the moves when so much detail is provided with regards to other aspects. However, that is not the case. In Dungeon World, a move is simply an action that can be undertaken within the game fiction that has different potential outcomes, and they are easily created based on the concept of a follower. For example, if the PCs were hiring a scout, I might give it the following moves: spot an ambush, make camp, or track something. The charts also define further characteristics about the followers, such as how many hit points they have, what payment they expect, whether it be the standard money or even just a kind word from their employer, what equipment they have, and other such characteristics. There's also a comprehensive list of tags that can be applied to a follower. The number of tags you get is determined by the preceding rolls you make on the charts, and each follower has a tag representing their own area of knowledge and lore that they can call upon. For example, the scout we used as an example a few moments ago might have the Forest Wise tag to represent that he has lived in the forest all his life and knows all about them. The next chapter is called See the World, and it replaces the original travelling rules from Dungeon World, adding in additional moves and some extra detail without adding a vast amount of extra complexity. Journeys are split depending on whether PCs travel a safe or a perilous route. Safe routes generally just involve marking off how many rations you consume, rather like the original Dungeon World travel rules, whereas dangerous routes involve making camp, foraging for supplies and staying sharp in case you should be attacked or come across any of the dangers inherent in wilderness exploration. I like this because if you want to simply go from A to B and it's not a central point of your game, then you can use the rules for safe routes. Whereas if you want to bring wilderness exploration more to the fore of your game, then the perilous route rules add an extra element of danger and excitement to it. And remember, there's no guarantee that just because a route used to be safe, that it still is. Failure, a roll of 6 or below, on any of the wilderness exploration moves gives the GM license to have conditions worsen or dangers impede the PC. This works in exactly the same manner as other moves in Dungeon World and is a very easy concept to pick up. The rest of the chapter offers some great GMing advice on how to make wilderness exploration and adventure more interesting for the PCs, encouraging GMs not to make it a simple slog through the woodlands or over plains, but to point out the fantastic elements of the setting, really showcasing what makes this area unique, making each venture into the perilous wilderness an exciting and unique experience. The next chapter is called Weathering the Storm, and it's labelled as a GM section, focusing on GMs describing the weather and the seasons, something that can add an awful lot of texture and detail to a wilderness RPG session, but it's something that's often forgotten or mentioned only in passing. A couple of moves are provided for when severe weather strikes, depending on whether the PCs hunker down and weather it out, or whether they push on regardless. The next chapter is called Live to Tell the Tale, and it offers a series of compendium classes. Again, not something I've really used in my own game. Compendium classes are a bit like prestige classes in D&D. They're only available to experienced characters, and they allow you to focus your character on a specific area of interest. The ones offered in this book focus, unsurprisingly, around wilderness exploration and include the Delver, someone who plunges into the depths of subterranean dungeons and caverns; the Explorer, someone who is sponsored by a patron to sally forth into the unknown and bring back new discoveries; the Hunter, an expert at wilderness survival and living off the land; the Leader, someone who specialises in leading these expeditions; and the Scout, someone who knows the lay of the land and the dangers it can pose. These classes are all very interesting and give access to additional moves, allowing the PCs to take advantage of the rules in Perilous Wilds. I love the fact that each class has a requirement to enter it. For example, you can only become a Delver after reaching the lowest level of 2 different dungeons. The next chapter is called Ask the Fates, and it's another GM chapter that provides a list of optional tables that give you idea seeds for generating discoveries, dangers, and various other fictional elements of the setting. There are also some useful tables for generating monsters on the fly. The GM rolls 1d12 3 times on the appropriate table, discovery, danger, etc., and with each roll reveals a word. These are not intended to completely create the fictional element for you, but to give you ideas to spur on your own creations. For example, if I'm creating a discovery, I roll a d12 3 times, and I get a 6, 9, and an 8. The tables tell me that the players have discovered some evidence. The evidence is remains or debris, and that there are signs of violence. So using this idea, I can then create the discovery. Perhaps the scout comes across the remains of armoured soldiers frozen in the snow and surmises that a great battle once occurred here on the frozen plains. The next chapter is called Plumb the Depths, and it focuses on creating dungeons. Now, generally, I'm a little bit sceptical of creating random dungeons, since they often seem illogical and, in my opinion, can strain the consistency of a setting. However, I've got to say, I'm actually pretty impressed with the advice given in Perilous Wilds, Continuing the style from earlier on in the book, the author doesn't try and provide random tables that allow you to map out every corridor and every passageway of a dungeon. Instead, the tables give you ideas about the themes of the dungeon and the reasons for them falling into disarray. I love this approach, and I find it much more compelling, along with the excellent advice that's offered, than something that just scatterguns a random assortment of rooms and corridors onto a grid. The last chapter is called Trust Your GM, and it's a general GM advice chapter. Now, there's already a lot of very good GM advice scattered throughout the rest of the book, so I wasn't sure what this chapter would actually contain. And what it does is it hammers home the main principles of the original Dungeon World game, those being to portray a fantastic world, fill the player characters' lives with adventure, and play to find out what happens. And it really hammers home how these principles apply to the optional material in Perilous Wilds. It then offers some additional brief advice on how to prep between sessions, and also where you can find further inspiration. The GM chapter's fairly short, it's only 4 or so pages, but it feels like it's the right sort of size. Like I said, a lot of GM advice is peppered throughout the other parts of the book, so we don't need it repeating. What the author wisely does is give us a nice summation of some of the earlier points and remind us what's important in a Dungeon World game. And I think really that's all that's needed at this point. The book then rounds off with a few lists of sample names taken from various real-world cultures to show how consistent naming conventions can help an RPG campaign. And then there's the obligatory couple of pages thanking the Kickstarter backers. So, in conclusion, I'm sure you'll have already guessed by now that I really enjoyed reading this book. It adds an extra level of detail to the Dungeon World experience while staying true to the streamlined mechanics of the original game and without unnecessarily increasing complexity. Some supplements are prone to add whole slews of new rules and subsystems to games when they seek to address specific areas of interest, and this can result in games becoming unwieldy and clunky. Fortunately, Perilous Wilds does not fall into this trap. The contents of this book would add a great deal to any Dungeon World game, and especially for anyone who wants to recapture that spirit of exploration that was at the heart of so many older D&D games, but still maintain that collaborative atmosphere and simplicity and elegance that Dungeon World has at its core. The PDF costs $8 in US money from DriveThruRPG, which is about £5 in English money, and for such a low price and with some additional bonuses such as a Ranger playbook, you really can't go far wrong with this supplement. I highly recommend it. So, if you've enjoyed this review, I hope you consider giving it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down, and I hope you'll consider clicking on the red dice up there to subscribe to my channel. If you have any comments on this review, please put them in the comments box down below or hit me up in the Google Plus links. I really do enjoy reading what you write. So until I see you next time, take care and happy gaming.